Your father ran a family business, Schwarzman's Curtains and Linens, and you started working there at 10 years old for 10 cents an hour.
Actually, I asked my grandfather for an increase to 25 cents. And he said, Stephen, you're not worth 10. So I guess these Schwarzmans, sort of have a certain objectivity. And the store looked like sort of Bed Bath & Beyond, except there was no Bed Bath & Beyond. And I'd watch all these customers. I said, this is like a good thing. So I went to my dad, probably when I was somewhere around 13. And I said, hey, Dad, a lot of people in this store, and why don't we take the store all over the country? I thought it was like a no-brainer. And he looked at me and he said, Steve, I don't want to do that. And I'm trying to figure out why he didn't want to do that. So then I decided tactically, maybe I should retreat to just Pennsylvania. So I said, Dad, let's, if you don't want to do that, let's just open them all over Pennsylvania. He said, I don't want to do that. I said, okay, I'm figuring maybe he doesn't want to travel. So I said, let's just open
How about a few more in Philadelphia?
6 or 7 stores around Philadelphia. And he said, I don't want to do that. And I said, Dad, why don't you want to do that? And he said, because I'm happy the way I am. I have 2 cars. I have a house. I have enough money to send you and your brothers to college. That's really all I want. And I couldn't take that on board. Why would that be all you want? But it was. He was a lovely person and super smart. So it was hard for me to imagine how a smart person wouldn't want to do that, because it was just right there, right? Bed Bath & Beyond showed that it was right there. But I learned that not everybody's the same. Not everybody likes to change what they do. Most people are quite happy just being in whatever space they're in. Even if they grumble about it a bit, they don't really have the gumption to go out and change. So it was, I always loved my dad. I didn't love him any less after that, interestingly. But I realized I was just like different than he was. At Lehman, I went into finance. I didn't even know what I was doing because I'm not a natural, for filling out spreadsheets and doing that kind of precision work. But I could always see patterns. And my first job interview at college, after it was just the interview process to get a job after college. Somebody interviewed me, I forget which company, and they said, what do you want to be? And I said, I want to be a telephone switchboard, which apparently put the man off. He said, what are you talking about? I said, I want all these feeds of things that exist in the world, and I want them to come in, I want to whirl them around, and I want them to go out differently than they came in. I said, that's what I want to be. The guy says, you're not for us. Now that I'm older, I realize, that was a little bit of an unconventional thing.
It's an unconventional answer, but it actually is a pretty good answer.
I thought people were transparent. I didn't know, right? They sort of have shields. I'm pretty transparent, as you can see.
So you join Lehman Brothers, and your career gets off and going. But I think obviously one of the most pivotal relationships that became hugely important to the direction of your career, the establishment of Blackstone, was in your second year at Lehman. Pete Peterson became chairman and CEO, and you developed a real bond with him.
Yeah, it was very interesting. Pete was 21 years older than me. He was an accidental CEO of the firm. It was, the firm got in trouble, and the old partners, I call them like the Dukes, they all hated each other, didn't trust each other, so they figured they'd take the new guy who was just hired, who didn't know anything about finance, and make him the head of it, and then they would control him. That was...
Didn't quite work that way.
Not a good assumption. So they didn't end up controlling him. But he knew nothing about finance. And so I was a second-year associate. firm had been in trouble. And so Pete went around with a guy named George Ball, who was Deputy Secretary of State, joined Lehman to find money to save the firm. To give you some idea of how midget-sized Goldman, Lehman, Morgan was, in 1972, $7 million of capital saved Lehman Brothers. So Pete sent a note out to everybody. This is why Lehman was so different than Goldman. Imagine this, that he sent a note out to everybody and all the partners and associates saying, okay, we've sort of had a mess now. How should we, what strategic plan should we have to run the firm? And at Goldman, you would have gotten a lot of responses from a lot of responsible, very smart people. At Lehman, nobody responded to the CEO except me, because I didn't get the word that that was politically incorrect, right? So I wrote him a strategic plan. It was, it was sort of, big corporate finance business, big money management business, whatever. So he called me down because he was lonely. Like nobody was down to see him. So I went down, he said, oh, you seem like a very smart young man, blah, blah, blah. Tell me about your plan. So, I danced my way through the plan. And then he said, that's great. He said, we should work together. And I said, that is a very, very bad idea. And he said, why is that a bad idea? I said, I heard you don't know anything. And as a result, you ask for a regular assignment about 5 times more stuff than you need because you're trying to figure out what you're doing. I said, I am a second-year associate. I don't know what I'm doing. So why would the two of us work together? I said, why don't we wait until at least I learn what I'm doing? And hopefully you'll learn what you're doing, and I will give you a call when I've learned, and I'd be glad to work together. I'm just not capable of doing that now productively. So he's sort of like,
who is this kid?
Right, who is this person? So I left, and about 2 or 3 years later, I called him, and I said, I'm ready. I said, I heard you're only asking 2 to 3 times as much information as you actually need. So you've made improvements, and I'm ready to go. And we started working together, and I became one of the youngest partners, at the firm. We had a great time, and he was a guy who was very smart, summa cum laude, process thinking. I was quicker.
So when did you decide to raise some funds?
Well, at the beginning,
yeah.
we had a plan. This is a piece of advice for you if you ever do something. Just don't do what everybody else is doing and think it's wonderful because you're doing it. The world couldn't care less, actually. You care. You think you're wonderful. The world doesn't care if you're in an area that's being well serviced. So what we did is we sat around and said, okay, we're going to start a business. Let's start something unique. And that's our distinctive thing. So we looked at a 3-part plan. First, go into the M&A advisory business. Why? We knew it. It requires no capital. Second, we wanted to go into what was then called the LBO business, which is the private equity business. That was the best business on the planet, except investing in Google in the first round. I had advised several of the firms that existed in private equity. There were only several of them, and nobody wanted to even underwrite them. I had to get special dispensation to do underwritings for some of these guys because they thought they were like nothing. And the third piece of what we wanted to do was to wait for periodic changes in finance, and if there was something that was happening that was like an amazing opportunity, that we wanted to do that, we decided we'd only do it in 2 circumstances. The first is if we could hire somebody who was a 10 out of 10, because then we know we would crush it, because we wouldn't know that field. And the second is if that business generated intellectual capital, so it made our existing businesses much stronger. If it didn't meet those two tests, we wouldn't do it. And so we took that strategic plan and we mailed it to everybody. And nobody gave it. It was amazing. And I thought it was a really good plan. By the way, it's 34 years later.
It was a really good plan.
We're still doing the same plan.
It was a really good
We've never changed. We just are executing the same thing. And we wait around until there's something really neat. So good, even I can't screw it up. So you have to pass up little things and only do really, really big things. So that was our plan. And it ends up now, they have different names for this, intellectual capital production. This is like data. We've been doing this since 1985 because knowledge is power in finance. Everybody thinks the same, more or less. I mean, you all test well, you all go to good schools, you all get well trained. So how do you win the game? You have to have knowledge other people don't have. And to do that, you have to produce that knowledge, and then you have to figure out how do the pieces fit. How do you see something in one area that tells you what's going to happen in another area? And if you have that, and you can mine that, and now they have names for this, data mining, okay? It's just information and seeing patterns, which lead you to other opportunities. But one piece of advice for you all that comes not just from this situation, but from others that we've all worked on, we, the older people, not old, older, that when there's something that's doable, you usually should hit it because time wounds all deals.
Yeah.
And so the deal that ultimately will be made, isn't as easy for some of the participant as a deal you could have made a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
And you learn this in your career, that there's certain times where, if you're able, you should just bang it and get it done. It's like a bond deal in a market, in which I learned, that's fallen apart. You don't price the bond, right where it would trade that second, because by the time you get back from a pricing committee, it's already 25 basis points down.
Yeah.
Price it 25 basis points ahead, you'll get the deal done. If you go back again when it's 25 points down, you're going to need another 25.